My name is Joyce, and I am 61 years old. During my distinguished career as a public affairs officer for the state government, I spent decades meticulously managing public perception and navigating complex media situations with unwavering integrity. The delicate art of crafting truthful narratives while protecting institutional reputations became second nature to me, a skill that served our community well through countless challenging situations. While building this demanding career, I simultaneously poured my heart into raising my son Michael as a single mother, instilling in him the values of honesty, hard work, and family loyalty that had guided my own life. When my brother David faced professional struggles throughout the years, and later when he married Susan, I embraced them both with open arms, believing wholeheartedly in the sacred bonds of family and our collective responsibility to support one another through life's inevitable challenges. Then the unthinkable happened, shattering everything I believed about trust and familial love. Susan, my sister-in-law, who I had welcomed into our family with genuine warmth, became consumed by a poisonous jealousy over Michael's remarkable professional success and his $200,000 annual income. In her twisted resentment, she launched a vicious slander campaign designed to destroy not just my reputation, but my very existence within our community. She fabricated a monstrous lie that cut to the core of everything I stood for. She accused me of physically assaulting her, filing a formal elder abuse report with Adult Protective Services that painted me as a violent, unstable woman who posed a danger to those around me. Joyce is a monster. She posted on carefully constructed fake Facebook accounts, spreading her poison across social media platforms like wildfire. When Michael, my beloved son, confronted me with tears in his eyes, asking if these horrific accusations could possibly be true, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. David, the brother I had protected and supported through his darkest moments, stood coldly by Susan's side, choosing her manufactured victimhood over decades of sibling loyalty. In one devastating moment, my professional integrity, my personal reputation, and my very humanity were viciously attacked and seemingly destroyed. I felt utterly isolated, financially threatened by mounting legal costs, and profoundly disrespected by the very people I had spent my life loving and protecting. Yet even as overwhelming despair threatened to consume my spirit entirely, something deeper began to stir within my soul. The same unwavering commitment to truth and strategic thinking that had made me an effective crisis communications expert ignited a cold, determined fury that surprised me with its intensity. What Susan, David, and their growing network of supporters could never suspect was the depth of my preparation and the sophistication of my documentation methods. Hidden throughout my home was a discreet, voice-activated recording system that had captured Susan fabricating her assault story and brazenly discussing her plans to create fake social media accounts to spread her lies. Years of meticulous journaling had documented her escalating jealousy and inappropriate behavior toward our family's success. My trusted cyber forensics ally stood ready with professional insights that would expose their manipulation tactics for what they truly were. This time, their insidious campaign of character assassination would not merely devastate me in silence. It would unravel completely, revealing the shocking depths of their cruelty while restoring my honor and forcing David to choose between truth and his wife's lies, though the personal cost would prove more agonizing than I could have ever imagined. 3 weeks had passed since Susan's initial accusation and the humiliating visit from Adult Protective Services. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and mounting anxiety as I watched my carefully built reputation crumble under the weight of her lies. The formal investigation was ongoing, casting a shadow over every aspect of my life and making me feel like a criminal in my own community. I knew I needed to confront this situation directly before it spiraled completely out of control. When I arrived at David and Susan's modest suburban home that Tuesday afternoon, I steeled myself for what I hoped would be a reasonable conversation between family members who could surely work through this misunderstanding. The house I had helped them purchase during David's financial struggles now felt foreign and hostile, as if the very walls had absorbed the poison Susan had been spreading about me. Susan answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and a carefully composed expression of wounded dignity that immediately set off my professional alarm bells. After decades of managing public relations crises, I could recognize a performance when I saw one, and everything about Susan's demeanor screamed calculated manipulation rather than genuine distress. "Joyce," she said, in a voice barely above a whisper, loud enough for curious neighbors to hear, but soft enough to appear vulnerable. "I don't think you should be here. After what happened, I'm still very shaken up." The theatrical quality of her response was both obvious and infuriating. This was the woman who had known me for 15 years, who had attended countless family gatherings where I had gone out of my way to make her feel welcome and valued. Now she was treating me like a dangerous stranger at the door of a home I had helped them afford. "Susan," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm and professional despite the rage building inside me, "we need to talk about these accusations you've made. You know as well as I do that I never laid a hand on you. This entire situation is based on a complete fabrication." But before Susan could respond, David appeared behind her, his face a mask of cold disapproval that I barely recognized. This was my brother, the man whose childhood scraped knees I had bandaged, whose adult financial disasters I had quietly resolved, whose wedding I had helped plan and pay for. Now he looked at me as if I were a troublesome stranger who had overstayed her welcome. "Joyce," David said, his voice carrying an edge I had never heard before. "Susan is very upset about what happened. Maybe you should consider taking some time to think about your actions before making this situation worse." The casual acceptance of Susan's lies in his tone was like a physical blow. David wasn't questioning Susan's story or seeking clarification about what had supposedly occurred. He had simply accepted her version of events as truth and positioned himself as her protector against my alleged violence. "David, you know me," I said, my voice breaking, despite my efforts to remain composed. "You've known me your entire life. When have I ever been violent? When have I ever raised my hand to anyone? This accusation is insane, and deep down you know it." But Susan was already moving into the next phase of her performance. She began to speak in a voice carefully modulated to carry to the neighboring yards where I could see curtains twitching as people strained to hear the drama unfolding. "I tried to be understanding about Joyce's behavior," Susan said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I know she's been under stress lately, but when she hit me, I realized this had gone too far. She's utterly unstable and losing her grip on reality. The way she's been treating Michael with such obvious favoritism, and now this violence toward me, it's clear she has serious mental health issues." Each word was chosen with surgical precision to inflict maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. Susan wasn't just accusing me of assault. She was painting a picture of systematic family dysfunction with me at the center, suggesting that my love for Michael was inappropriate favoritism and that my supposed violence toward her was part of a broader pattern of instability. She has no humanity left in her. Susan continued, her voice rising, just enough to ensure maximum neighborhood coverage. She's lost her mind completely, and she's trying to destroy our family out of pure jealousy. Someone needs to stop her before she hurts someone else. The calculated cruelty of her words was breathtaking. She was using my own brother's yard as a stage for a public character assassination, confident that David would not challenge her performance or defend me against her lies. When Michael arrived an hour later, summoned by Susan's frantic phone call about my threatening behavior, I saw my own son look at me with confusion and growing suspicion. The sight of his doubt, the way he studied my face, as if seeing a stranger, was more painful than any physical assault could have been. "Mom," Michael said, his voice heavy with distress. "What's going on here? Susan called me crying, saying you came over here acting aggressively. She says you hit her last week. Did you? Please tell me this isn't true." The pain in his voice was genuine, but underlying, it was something that chilled me to the bone. He was actually considering the possibility that his mother, the woman who had raised him with patience and love, might be capable of unprovoked violence against a family member. "Michael," I said, reaching toward him instinctively, "you know me better than anyone. Have I ever been violent? Have I ever lost control like that? This is a complete fabrication designed to destroy our family." But David interrupted before Michael could respond, his voice cold and accusatory. "Joyce, Susan is very upset, and frankly, your behavior today isn't helping your case. You're causing a scene and making everyone uncomfortable. You need to control yourself before this gets any worse." The implication in his words was clear. I was the problem, my presence was unwelcome, and my attempts to defend myself were evidence of the instability Susan had described. My own brother was actively participating in my character assassination, lending credibility to accusations he knew were false. That evening, the real scope of Susan's campaign became clear when her social media posts began circulating throughout our community. Using carefully created fake Facebook accounts, she had crafted a narrative that transformed her from aggressor to victim, and me from respected professional to dangerous elder. "Beware of Joyce Peterson." One post read, accompanied by a deliberately unflattering photo of me taken during a moment of stress. "She's a violent, manipulative elder who tried to assault her own family member. This woman has completely lost touch with reality and poses a real danger to those around her. Disgusting lack of humanity. Our elder abuse. Family monster." The posts were designed to go viral, and they succeeded beyond Susan's wildest dreams. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with notifications as friends, neighbors, and professional colleagues shared and commented on Susan's poison. The comment section became a feeding frenzy of judgment and condemnation from people who knew nothing about me beyond Susan's carefully crafted lies. "I always thought there was something off about her," one neighbor wrote. "She always seemed too perfect, too controlled. This just confirms what I suspected." Another added, "Thank God someone finally exposed her true nature. People like this are dangerous to have in our community." The systematic destruction of my reputation was swift and comprehensive. Neighbors who had waved to me for years now crossed the street to avoid me. Professional colleagues began distancing themselves from any association with my name. The local grocery store clerks, who had always greeted me warmly, now avoided eye contact and hurried through our transactions. But Susan wasn't finished with her assault on my life and livelihood. Within days, her lawyer, Jenkins, had filed a formal lawsuit against me for defamation and elder abuse, demanding $50,000 in damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. The legal document was a masterwork of manipulation painting Susan as an innocent victim of my supposedly systematic campaign of psychological abuse. More devastating than the financial threat was Jenkins's strategic contact with my former government agency. He subtly implied that I had used my position as a public affairs officer to cover up past issues and manipulate public perception for personal gain. The suggestion that my professional integrity had been compromised triggered a preliminary inquiry into my previously impeccable record-casting doubt on decades of honest public service. The legal fees alone were staggering. Within weeks, I had been forced to retain my own attorney and was facing costs that already exceeded $15,000 with no end in sight. The woman who had spent her career managing crises for others was now drowning in a crisis of her own, fighting for her reputation, her financial security, and her very identity within the community she had served faithfully for decades. As I sat in my empty house that evening, surrounded by the awards and commendations that had once represented a life well lived, I felt the weight of complete isolation settling over me like a suffocating blanket. Susan's campaign had been more effective than I had ever imagined possible, turning my own family against me and transforming me from a respected community member into a social pariah. But buried beneath my overwhelming pain and shock, something else was stirring the same analytical mind that had successfully navigated countless public relations disasters was beginning to recognize patterns in Susan's behavior that went far beyond normal family conflict. This was sophisticated psychological warfare, and I was finally beginning to understand that I needed to fight back with every tool at my disposal. The weeks following Susan's initial assault on my character brought an escalating campaign of psychological warfare that revealed the true scope of her hatred and the sophisticated nature of her planning. What I had initially hoped might be a temporary emotional outburst was emerging as a calculated long-term strategy designed to destroy not just my reputation, but my entire existence within our community. Susan and Jenkins intensified their public smear campaign with the precision of professional operatives. They began leaking what they called evidence to local tabloids and online gossip sites, but the materials were carefully manipulated to support their narrative. Photographs of me looking strained or angry, taken out of context during family gatherings or professional events, were presented as evidence of my unstable mental state and history of aggressive behavior. One particularly devastating leak showed me in heated discussion with a colleague during a budget meeting years earlier. The normal professional disagreement reframed as evidence of my inability to control her temper in workplace situations. Another showed me looking exhausted after a particularly challenging day, presented with a caption suggesting I was displaying signs of mental deterioration and erratic behavior. The most insidious aspect of their campaign was the demand for access to my private journals and financial records. Jenkins filed a formal discovery motion claiming that my personal writings and financial history were essential to understanding my pattern of manipulation and psychological abuse within the family. The implication was that I had somehow mismanaged my own money or secretly funded Michael's success as part of a controlling scheme to maintain dominance over family members. The public humiliation was swift and comprehensive. My personal social media accounts were flooded with hateful messages from strangers who had been influenced by Susan's campaign. You should be ashamed of yourself abusing family members at your age. One message read, "People like you are why elder abuse laws exist, except you're the abuser," wrote another. The most chilling messages came with specific threats. Someone should teach you what real violence feels like, and karma is coming for you, old woman. Each message felt like another nail in the coffin of my reputation and social standing. The community I had served faithfully for decades was now turning against me based on the lies of a woman who had contributed nothing to our collective well-being but seemed determined to destroy someone who had. But the most devastating insight into Susan's true character came when I accidentally witnessed a conversation between her and a neighbor while walking past their yard one evening. Hidden behind a hedge, I heard Susan's voice lose all pretense of victimhood as she spoke with casual venom about my downfall. I knew exactly how to get to her, Susan said with satisfaction that made my blood run cold. Joyce always thought she was so much better than everyone else with her fancy government job and her perfect son. She needed to be brought down a few pegs, and now everyone can see what she really is. The neighbor's response revealed how effectively Susan had poisoned even casual acquaintances against me. I always thought there was something fake about her helpfulness and community involvement. This just proves that people who seem too good to be true usually are. The best part, Susan continued with chilling calculation, is that she's getting exactly what she deserves. All those years of looking down on David and me, acting like she was doing us some kind of favor by including us in family events. Now she knows what it feels like to be the outsider, to have everyone talking about you behind your back. The conversation confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Susan's accusations weren't driven by any genuine grievance or actual incident. This was pure malicious envy, a systematic campaign to destroy someone whose life and success she resented. She was actively enjoying my suffering, reveling in the social isolation and professional damage she had orchestrated. In that moment of devastating clarity, I was forced to confront the most painful sacrifice I had ever made for David, a secret I had carried alone for over 20 years. When David was 32 and struggling to establish himself as an independent contractor, he had made a series of catastrophic business decisions that left him drowning in debt and facing potential criminal charges. The details were complex and humiliating. David had borrowed heavily to invest in what he believed was a legitimate construction opportunity, only to discover that the entire operation was a money laundering scheme for organized crime. When federal investigators began closing in on the operation, David faced potential charges for money laundering and racketeering that would have resulted in decades in federal prison. The scandal would have destroyed not just David's life, but our entire family's reputation in the community. As a public affairs officer, I understood exactly what needed to be done to protect him from the consequences of his naive involvement in criminal activity. I liquidated my entire personal retirement account, over $70,000 I had saved through decades of careful planning and responsible financial management. But money alone wasn't enough to resolve David's crisis. I used my professional reputation and government connections to arrange for evidence to be suppressed, charges to be reduced through plea agreements, and David's involvement to be minimized through complex legal maneuvering that cost me every favor I had accumulated over 15 years of public service. Most painfully, I convinced several of my professional colleagues to contribute to what I called a legal defense fund for a family member wrongly accused of financial crimes. I allowed them to believe they were helping an innocent person fight false charges, never revealing the extent of David's actual involvement or the systematic cover-up I was orchestrating. I kept this sacrifice completely hidden from David, never wanting him to feel beholden to me or to carry the guilt of knowing how much his freedom had cost. I allowed him to believe he had overcome his legal troubles through competent legal representation and fortunate circumstances, never revealing that his sister had sacrificed her retirement security and professional relationships to save him. Now watching Susan systematically destroy my reputation while David stood passively by the irony was unbearable. The brother whose freedom and future I had purchased with my life savings was allowing his wife to treat me as if I were a dangerous criminal rather than the woman who had saved him from federal prison. When I attempted to subtly remind David of our bond and my lifelong commitment to his welfare, hoping to rekindle some memory of family loyalty without revealing the full extent of my sacrifice, his response was devastating in its complete dismissal of our history. "Joyce, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your so-called favors and sacrifices," he said, his voice filled with the irritation of someone who had been thoroughly coached to respond this way. "Your past choices are your own business, and they don't give you the right to interfere with how Susan and I handle our lives. She says you're just trying to manipulate me with guilt trips and false claims about helping me." The words felt like physical blows, not just because David was refusing to acknowledge my sacrifices, but because he was reframing them as manipulation tactics designed to control his current behavior. Susan had successfully convinced him that my past devotion was actually a form of psychological abuse. Susan's response was even more calculated and cruel. "Honestly, Joyce," she said with practiced concern, "we're all getting quite worried about your mental health. You seem to be developing some paranoid ideas about people not appreciating your contributions to the family. Maybe you should consider talking to a professional about these feelings of entitlement and these delusions about your importance in other people's lives." The suggestion that I needed psychiatric intervention was the final piece of Susan's campaign to discredit my competence and credibility. By questioning my mental health, she was laying the groundwork for future claims that anything I said in my own defense was the product of delusional thinking rather than legitimate concerns about her behavior. The culmination of this psychological assault came when Jenkins proposed what he called a reasonable settlement that was actually designed to force my complete capitulation. His offer was as insulting as it was comprehensive. I would publicly retract all my false accusations against Susan, acknowledge my mental instability and inappropriate behavior, and pay $100,000 as compensation for the emotional distress my lies had caused. In return, Susan would graciously agree to drop her lawsuit and cease her public defamation campaign. The settlement was designed not just to silence me, but to legitimize her version of events and transform me from victim to perpetrator in the public record. This is a generous offer, considering the documented harm your behavior has caused my client, Jenkins explained during our phone conversation. Susan is willing to put aside the trauma you've caused her in the interest of family healing, but this requires complete acknowledgement of your responsibility for this situation. As I sat in my empty house that night, facing financial ruin and social exile, I felt the weight of a terrible clarity settling over me. Susan hadn't simply become resentful or vindictive. She had transformed into someone capable of systematic psychological warfare against a family member whose only crime was achieving success and maintaining integrity. But buried beneath my overwhelming pain, the same strategic mind that had protected my government agency through countless crises was beginning to analyze Susan's campaign with professional detachment. And what I saw gave me the first flicker of hope I had felt in weeks. Susan was creating documentation of her own malicious behavior, and I had been recording every word. The legal machinery that Susan and Jenkins had constructed reached its devastating climax with a document that would forever change my understanding of how completely my own family had turned against me. The restraining order arrived by certified mail on a gray Friday morning, its official language transforming my attempts to maintain family relationships into criminal behavior. Joyce Peterson is hereby prohibited from contacting, approaching, or communicating with Susan Peterson through any means including but not limited to direct contact, social media, third parties, or intermediaries. The order read in cold legal terminology. Additionally, the respondent is prohibited from contact with community members, neighbors, or local business establishments where the petitioner may reasonably expect to encounter harassment or intimidation. The scope of the restraining order was breathtaking in its comprehensiveness. I was not only banned from contact with Susan and David, but effectively exiled from my own community. The order prohibited me from attending church services where Susan might be present, shopping at stores where she might encounter me, or even walking in public areas where our paths might cross. Susan had succeeded in making me a prisoner in my own home, trapped by the fear that any accidental encounter might result in my arrest. The grounds for the restraining order were a masterwork of character assassination disguised as victim protection. Jenkins had crafted allegations of persistent harassment, intimidation tactics, and escalating threats based entirely on my attempts to defend myself against Susan's lies. My efforts to contact family members and friends to explain my side of the story were reframed as obsessive behavior and attempts to manipulate witnesses. Most devastating of all, the order included provisions that effectively ended my social existence within the community. I couldn't attend local events, participate in community organizations where I had volunteered for years, or maintain relationships with mutual friends who might feel obligated to choose sides in our conflict. The isolation was swift and comprehensive. Neighbors who had been friendly for decades now avoided eye contact when they saw me. Professional colleagues stopped returning my calls. Even the mail carrier began leaving packages at the end of my driveway rather than approaching my door, as if I had become toxic to be near. But my heart refused to accept this legal banishment as the final word on my relationship with David. In my desperation to somehow reach the brother I had raised and protected, I spent days carefully assembling a collection of our most precious memories together. I gathered photographs from David's childhood, his high school graduation, where I had cheered louder than anyone his wedding day, where I had walked him down the aisle after our father's death family vacations, where his laughter had been the soundtrack to some of my happiest moments. I included pictures of Susan from her early days in our family holiday gatherings, where she had seemed genuinely happy to be included, birthday celebrations, where I had gone out of my way to make her feel special, quiet moments of what I had believed was authentic family connection. I wrote a letter that poured out 61 years of sibling love and devotion, carefully avoiding any mention of the current conflict, while emphasizing the unbreakable bonds that should connect families through all challenges. My dearest David, I wrote, these pictures represent the foundation of who we are as a family. You were my baby brother, my greatest responsibility, and my deepest joy. Through every challenge, every triumph, every moment of uncertainty, we stood together. I pray that these memories will remind you of the woman who has loved you unconditionally your entire life, even when circumstances make that love difficult to see. I left the album on their doorstep late one evening, hoping that seeing our documented history together might soften David's heart or remind him of the sister who had sacrificed everything to protect him from the consequences of his mistakes. For 3 days, I allowed myself to hope that maybe this visual reminder of our bond might crack the wall of manipulation Susan had built around my brother. I imagined David quietly looking through the photographs, remembering the woman who had been his protector and advocate throughout his life. Instead, I discovered the album's fate through social media in a post that shattered whatever remained of my faith in family loyalty. Susan had photographed my carefully assembled memories scattered across what appeared to be a fire pit in their backyard, the pictures partially burned and some completely destroyed. Cleaning out the clutter, Susan's caption read with casual cruelty that took my breath away. Some people just can't let go of the past and move forward from negativity. Time to focus on healthy relationships and positive energy instead of desperate attempts to manipulate through false nostalgia. Old memories burn bright, moving forward. The comments below the post were filled with supportive messages from people who had no idea they were celebrating the destruction of irreplaceable family memories. "Good for you," friends wrote. "Sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life completely. Stay strong and protect yourself from manipulation." That image of our family history literally going up in smoke broke something inside me that I knew would never fully heal. These weren't just photographs. They were the visual record of a relationship that had defined my entire adult life, moments of pure love and connection that could never be recreated or replaced. David's final communication confirmed that his transformation from loving brother to cold stranger was complete. His text message arrived at midnight, as if he had been lying awake planning the perfect words to inflict maximum damage. "Consider this closed, Joyce. You lose. Don't contact me or Susan again, ever. You're causing too much trouble with your lies and your desperate attempts to control our lives. I'm done pretending you were ever anything more than a manipulative, controlling woman who can't accept that people see through her act." The next day, Susan escalated her public relations campaign with calls to local news outlets. Jenkins had prepared a statement positioning me as a cautionary tale about elderly family members who become dangerous when their authority is challenged. We're sharing our story to help other families recognize the warning signs of elder manipulation and psychological abuse, Susan told a local television reporter. Sometimes people who seem helpful and involved are actually using their position to control and intimidate family members. We hope our experience will help others protect themselves from similar situations. The interview aired during the evening news, transforming my personal nightmare into public entertainment. Susan's performance was flawless, portraying herself as a brave victim, speaking out to protect others, while I was characterized as a dangerous predator who had finally been exposed. But in my moment of absolute despair, I was forced to confront the most painful secret of my entire life, a truth I had shared with no one and had hoped to take to my grave. The weight of this secret, combined with everything Susan and David were putting me through, finally broke my resolve to protect everyone else at the expense of my own well-being. In a moment of raw desperation, I called my daughter-in-law Brenda and revealed something that would change everything if it ever became public. Michael's remarkable success wasn't just the result of his intelligence and hard work. It was built on a foundation of medical treatments and interventions that I had secretly funded for over 20 years. My son had been born with a rare genetic condition that would have severely limited his cognitive development and physical capabilities without expensive experimental treatments. The condition was so uncommon that insurance wouldn't cover the therapies needed to give him a normal life, and the specialists required payment up front before they would even begin treatment. From the time Michael was 5 years old, I had been secretly paying for cutting-edge medical interventions, specialized tutoring, and developmental therapies that cost over $50,000 annually. I liquidated investments, worked extra jobs, and borrowed against my home to fund treatments that allowed Michael to develop normally and eventually achieve the success that Susan now envied. I kept this sacrifice completely hidden because I wanted Michael to believe his achievements were entirely his own, earned through his natural abilities rather than medical interventions funded by his mother's life savings. I thought my silence was a gift, allowing him to feel genuine pride in accomplishments that had actually required enormous medical and financial support. Now, as I sat in my legally isolated home, prohibited from defending myself against accusations of favoritism and manipulation, the cosmic irony was unbearable. The woman Susan characterized as showing inappropriate favoritism toward Michael had actually been ensuring his survival and development through sacrifices that went far beyond normal parental support. Susan's systematic campaign to destroy me wasn't just cruel, it was a complete inversion of reality. My controlling behavior had been life-saving medical advocacy, and my manipulation had been the quiet protection of a son who never knew how much his success had cost. But buried beneath my overwhelming pain and the devastating irony of my situation, something else was stirring the same professional instincts that had protected government interests during countless crises. For the first time since this nightmare began, I started thinking like the public affairs officer I had been, rather than the heartbroken sister I had become. Susan's campaign against me was sophisticated, but it was also documented. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel calculation had been recorded by the voice-activated system I had installed for security purposes. The evidence of her systematic fraud was mounting, and soon it would be time to reveal the truth about who Susan really was and what she had done to our family. The final battle for my dignity and my family's honor was about to begin. The restraining order created a psychological prison more suffocating than any physical confinement I had ever experienced. In the weeks that followed, I found myself trapped in a terrifying abyss of isolation, haunted by the monumental secret of Michael's hidden medical condition and the decades of financial sacrifice I had made in complete silence. Every morning brought the crushing realization that the truth which could vindicate me was the same truth that would destroy the carefully constructed fiction of Michael's natural achievements. The weight of concealing Michael's genetic condition and my ongoing financial support felt unbearable in my solitude. I would lie awake at night, replaying those early years when specialists had told me my son would never develop normally without expensive interventions, remembering the desperate consultations with medical experts across the country, the sleepless nights spent researching experimental treatments, the quiet conversations with billing departments as I arranged payment for therapies that cost more than most people's annual salaries. That same secret now felt like evidence of the favoritism Susan accused me of showing Michael. How could I explain to anyone that the mother they portrayed as inappropriately devoted to her son had actually been ensuring his survival and normal development through sacrifices that went far beyond typical parental support? The truth seemed so extraordinary that speaking it aloud would only confirm Susan's narrative about my grandiose delusions and mental instability. But Susan and Jenkins weren't content with my private torment. They escalated their public campaign with surgical precision, targeting the professional reputation I had built over 30 years of dedicated public service. Jenkins began discreetly contacting public affairs associations and crisis communications firms, spreading carefully crafted concerns about my mental competence and professional judgment. "I'm calling out of professional obligation," Jenkins told the director of the National Association of Government Communicators during a conversation I later learned about through sympathetic colleagues. "Joyce Peterson, one of your long-standing members, appears to be experiencing significant cognitive decline that's manifesting as paranoid fantasies about reputation management and conspiracy theories about family members. Her recent behavior suggests she may be developing obsessive delusions that could compromise her understanding of ethical communication practices." The campaign was devastatingly effective. My reputation for sharp judgment and unwavering honesty, built over 3 decades of successful crisis management and ethical public service, was systematically dismantled through whispered concerns and professional warnings. Speaking engagements at communication conferences were quietly canceled. Academic institutions removed my name from advisory boards where I had served with distinction for years. Former colleagues began treating me with the careful sympathy reserved for aging professionals who were losing their grip on reality. Phone calls went unreturned, professional invitations stopped arriving, and when I encountered other communication specialists at community events, I could see the doubt in their eyes mixed with pity for someone who had supposedly been overcome by the paranoid delusions of advanced age. "Joyce," one former colleague said carefully when she encountered me at the post office, "people are saying you've been having some difficulties with family relationships and professional boundaries. Maybe it would be good to take a step back from public affairs activities for a while, just to focus on your own well-being and mental health." The financial devastation followed with cruel efficiency. The escalating legal fees from defending myself against Susan's lawsuit and her subsequent defamation campaign completely drained my modest savings. My bank accounts were frozen pending investigation of financial irregularities in my management of government-related expenses, leaving me without access to money I had earned through decades of honest, dedicated work. The eviction from my cherished home was the culmination of Susan's systematic destruction of my life. The house where I had raised Michael as a single mother, where I had built a successful career while providing him with the medical support he needed, was sold at public auction to cover my mounting legal debts. Strangers walked through rooms filled with 30 years of public service memories, commenting on the excessive number of professional awards and the outdated crisis management books I had collected throughout my career. My remaining possessions were scattered across the lawn, like the remnants of a life that no longer mattered. Professional certifications, awards for excellence in public affairs, letters of commendation from grateful government officials, all reduced to lot numbers in an estate sale that drew curious neighbors eager to witness the fall of someone who had once been respected in their community. The homeless shelter was a crowded, impersonal facility where I became just another elderly woman whose family had abandoned her. I lay on a thin mattress, listening to the sounds of other broken lives, trying to reconcile the woman I had been with the reality of my current circumstances. But perhaps the cruelest blow was yet to come. Susan and David orchestrated a public relations event that weaponized my grandchildren against me in the most systematic way possible. They leveraged 10-year-old Ethan and 8-year-old Chloe in a charity event for something called the Family Harmony Foundation, an organization supposedly dedicated to protective family relationships and healing from toxic family dynamics. I learned about the event from a former colleague who sent me a link with a warning that I might not want to watch. But I couldn't resist the desperate need to see my grandchildren, even if it meant witnessing my own destruction. There was Ethan standing confidently at a small podium, delivering a speech that had clearly been written by adults and rehearsed for maximum emotional impact. Sometimes families have to make difficult decisions to protect themselves from people who create confusion and sadness. He said, his young voice steady and confident. It's important to find peace and move away from negative influences, even when those influences come from people we used to trust. 8-year-old Chloe followed with an art presentation displaying a drawing of a happy, peaceful family that conspicuously excluded any figure that could represent me. This is my picture of what families look like when everyone is honest and safe, she explained to the audience with heartbreaking innocence. When there are no more lies or angry people to make everyone upset. The message was unmistakable. I was the source of family dysfunction, the angry person whose lies had created chaos, the negative influence from whom they needed protection. My own grandchildren, whom I had once hoped to guide through life's challenges with the wisdom earned through professional crisis management, had been programmed to see me as someone dangerous and emotionally harmful. This public display of coached emotional distance by children I adored felt like a wound that would never heal. Ethan and Chloe had been manipulated into participating in my destruction without understanding what they were doing, their innocence corrupted to serve Susan's narrative of family protection and emotional wellness. As I sat in the shelter that night, surrounded by the sounds of other people's despair, I felt myself sinking into a darkness so profound that I began to understand why some people simply stopped fighting. The combination of legal threats, financial ruin, professional destruction, and family rejection felt like more than any human being should be expected to endure. But then, like a miracle emerging from my darkest moment, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. The voice belonged to Margaret Torres, a young woman I had trained as a public affairs specialist 20 years ago when she was just starting her career in government communication. She was now a respected leader in crisis management, and she had been following my situation with growing alarm and disbelief. "Joyce," she said, her voice filled with warmth and absolute certainty, "I've been watching what's happening to you, and I want you to know that none of it makes sense to anyone who actually knows your character and professional methods. You saved my career when I was a struggling new communicator. You taught me that crisis management means protecting truth, not covering it up, that ethical communication requires courage even when it's professionally costly, and that our responsibility is always to the public interest, not to personal comfort." Margaret offered immediate financial support to help me mount a proper legal defense, and more importantly, she connected me with a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder abuse defamation and professional character assassination cases. For the first time in months, I was hearing voices of people who understood that my love for my family was not manipulation, but the natural devotion of someone who had been systematically betrayed by the people she had protected most fiercely. "We've seen cases like this before," one of the attorneys told me during our first consultation. Family members who use sophisticated legal and psychological tactics to isolate elderly relatives for financial gain or personal satisfaction. What makes your case particularly disturbing is the level of professional manipulation involved and the corruption of family loyalty, but that also means there will be documented evidence we can analyze and challenge. As I hung up the phone that night, something fierce and determined stirred within me for the first time since the restraining order had been issued. Susan and David thought they had broken me completely, erased me from their family's story, silenced my voice forever. But they had forgotten something crucial about public affairs officers. We don't just manage crises. We investigate them, document them, and ensure that truth eventually prevails when institutions are threatened by lies and manipulation. The war for my dignity and my family's honor was far from over. Margaret's support had rekindled hope within me, but Susan's campaign of destruction was entering a new and more sophisticated phase. If anything, my small network of allies seemed to motivate her to escalate her efforts in ways that demonstrated just how calculating and comprehensive her plan to erase me had become. What Susan orchestrated next was so professionally devastating and personally cruel that it revealed the true scope of her psychological warfare. She leveraged Jenkins's legal standing and her newfound social media influence to organize what she called a Truth and Transparency in Family Legacies Summit. The event was positioned as a prestigious national conference bringing together legal experts, family therapists, and social media influencers to discuss contemporary approaches to family accountability and protecting vulnerable family members from manipulation by those in positions of authority. But I quickly recognized it as an elaborate public execution of my professional legacy and life's work. Susan was announced as the keynote speaker, presenting what she described as a groundbreaking case study on exposing hidden family manipulation and the dangers of professional authority being used for personal gain. Though she never mentioned our family by name, every detail was clearly based on our situation, but twisted beyond recognition to support her narrative. Today, I want to share how one family overcame decades of systematic psychological manipulation by someone who used professional expertise to control and silence family members. Susan announced to an audience of hundreds with thousands more watching the live stream. Sometimes the people we trust most, those with professional credentials and community standing, are the ones causing the most damage through sophisticated manipulation techniques disguised as helpful expertise. I learned about the summit from Margaret, who had been monitoring Susan's activities and was horrified by what she discovered. "Joyce," she said, her voice shaking with anger, "she's using your own professional principles against you. Everything you taught about ethical communication and crisis management. She's twisting into evidence of manipulation and cover-up activities." From my small room in transitional housing that Margaret had helped me secure, I watched the summit's live stream on a borrowed tablet, witnessing the systematic dismantling of everything I had believed about truth, integrity, and public service. Susan stood confidently at the podium, presenting herself as a brave truth-teller who had exposed decades of hidden family manipulation, despite enormous personal cost. Traditional crisis communications, Susan said with practiced authority, often serves to protect the guilty rather than help the innocent. We see this particularly in family systems where one member uses professional manipulation skills to control narratives and suppress inconvenient truths about their behavior. Every word was calculated to portray my life's work as morally bankrupt, my professional expertise as evidence of my manipulative nature. She spoke about the danger of reputation managers who become so skilled at hiding truth that they lose touch with reality, and the responsibility of younger generations to break free from inherited manipulation patterns. David appeared alongside Susan, providing what he called personal testimony about recognizing and overcoming professional manipulation within families. His performance was devastating, positioning himself as a victim who had finally found the courage to expose a family member's systematic abuse of professional authority. What we discovered, David told the interviewer with practiced vulnerability, was that some family members use their supposed professional expertise to justify inappropriate control over family narratives. They claim that their years of training give them special insight into what information should be shared or suppressed, but really, they're protecting themselves from accountability for their actions. But the most devastating moment came when they introduced video testimonials from Ethan himself. My 10-year-old grandson appeared in a carefully produced segment that had obviously been professionally filmed and extensively coached. I used to think my grandmother was really smart because she worked for the government, Ethan said, looking directly into the camera with the practiced confidence of a child who had been repeatedly rehearsed. But now I understand that all those communication skills were being used to hide the truth about our family. We learned that being honest is more important than managing what people think. The subtext was unmistakable. My professional skills in crisis communication were being reframed as family manipulation tools my government service portrayed as training in deception rather than public accountability. My own grandson was being used to publicly declare that professional communication expertise was inherently dishonest and potentially harmful. Chloe's appearance was even more calculated and cruel. Now 8 years old and clearly influenced by months of Susan's narrative, she appeared in a short video clip, giggling as she held up one of my old public relations textbooks. Grandma Joyce used to read these books about controlling what people think, she said with childish innocence that was clearly rehearsed but delivered with convincing spontaneity. But we learned that all that fancy talking just makes everything more confusing. We prefer unfiltered truth that doesn't try to manage people's feelings. The audience laughed appreciatively at her youthful wisdom, never knowing they were witnessing a child who had been systematically programmed to reject her grandmother's life's work. Everything I had tried to teach my grandchildren about the importance of thoughtful communication and ethical narrative management was being reframed as evidence of moral corruption and professional misconduct. As the summit continued, I sat trembling in my chair, watching decades of professional accomplishment being perverted into a cautionary tale about the dangers of communication professionals who abuse their skills for personal gain. Susan fielded questions from the audience with the confidence of someone who had completely convinced herself that she was exposing genuine wrongdoing rather than orchestrating character assassination. How do you deal with family members who refuse to acknowledge their manipulative behavior? Someone asked from the audience. It's heartbreaking. Susan replied, her voice filled with practiced pain. Sometimes you have to accept that people who have spent decades controlling narratives can't stop, even when that control is destroying the people they claim to love. The most loving thing you can do is expose the truth, even when they try to make you feel guilty for breaking their carefully constructed lies. The comment section of the live stream was filled with supportive messages praising Susan's courage in standing up to professional manipulation and exposing the dark side of communication expertise. Thousands of strangers were celebrating the destruction of my professional reputation as if they were witnessing a triumph of authentic truth over institutional deception. But something else was happening that Susan couldn't see or control. Margaret had quietly reached out to several of my former colleagues and the government agencies I had served during my 30-year career, people who understood my actual approach to public affairs and could recognize the distortion being presented at the summit. Dr. Robert Chen, a respected professor of public administration who had worked with me on numerous government transparency initiatives, was watching the summit with growing disgust and professional alarm. After Susan's presentation ended, he immediately contacted Margaret with an offer to provide expert testimony about my character and methods. What I'm seeing is a sophisticated character assassination designed to exploit public misunderstanding of ethical communication principles, Dr. Chen told Margaret. Everything Susan is describing as Joyce's manipulation is actually the opposite of her established methods. She was known throughout our professional community for her commitment to transparency and her refusal to engage in cover-up activities, even when it was politically inconvenient. Other public affairs professionals were reaching similar conclusions. The very sophistication of Susan's attack was beginning to work against her, revealing patterns that experienced communicators recognized as projection rather than legitimate whistleblowing about professional misconduct. As I closed the tablet that evening, unable to watch any more of my life's work being perverted into evidence of my supposed moral failings, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: a cold, analytical understanding of what Susan was really doing. She wasn't just trying to exclude me from family relationships or protect herself from an allegedly manipulative relative. This was a systematic attempt to rewrite the entire narrative of professional ethics, positioning herself as an authentic truth teller who had overcome the sophisticated deception of someone trained in institutional manipulation. But in her eagerness to completely destroy my professional legacy, Susan had also created a documented trail of her own manipulation tactics that could be analyzed and exposed by people who truly understood communication ethics and family dynamics. For the first time since the restraining order had been issued, I began to think like the public affairs officer I had been rather than the heartbroken sister I had become. And what I saw gave me the first real hope I had felt in months. Susan was overplaying her hand, and people who truly understood professional ethics were beginning to notice the disturbing patterns in her behavior. The success of the Truth and Transparency Summit seemed to embolden Susan for what could only be described as total financial warfare. The public attention and validation she had received from positioning herself as a brave whistleblower exposing professional manipulation had fed something dark and insatiable within her. She wasn't content with destroying my reputation or isolating me from my family. She wanted complete economic annihilation, the total erasure of every resource I might use to fight back. The final assault came in the form of a lawsuit so comprehensive and vindictive that it took my breath away. Susan filed a $1 million claim against me, alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress and systematic defamation resulting from what she characterized as my decades-long campaign of professional manipulation and psychological abuse within our family. The lawsuit was frivolous but legally sophisticated, designed to force me into massive legal fees that would completely drain whatever resources Margaret's support network had temporarily provided. Jenkins had crafted the complaint with surgical precision, weaving together fabricated accusations about my communication methods with careful legal language that made my past sacrifices for my family sound like evidence of controlling and professionally manipulative behavior. The defendant has engaged in a pattern of psychological and financial manipulation spanning decades. The lawsuit claimed using her supposed professional expertise and claimed sacrifices to exert inappropriate control over family dynamics and suppress legitimate concerns about her behavior. But the financial attack extended far beyond the lawsuit itself. Susan had systematically contacted my former government agency, my professional liability insurance company, and even my pension fund administrators, filing detailed complaints that painted me as mentally incompetent and professionally dangerous. We have serious concerns about Joyce Peterson's cognitive state and her fitness to have held positions involving public trust. Susan wrote in letters that were somehow leaked to professional publications. Her recent obsessive behavior toward our family suggests possible dementia or other cognitive impairments that may have affected her professional judgment for years. We believe there may be undisclosed incidents involving misuse of communication resources that warrant investigation. The bureaucratic machinery moved with terrifying efficiency. Within weeks, I received official notification that my government pension was being suspended pending a competency evaluation and investigation into potential professional misconduct. My public affairs certifications were revoked based on Susan's allegations of gross ethical violations and abuse of professional authority for personal gain. 30 years of flawless public service, countless successful crisis management situations, decades of ethical communication practice that had served the public interest faithfully, all erased with a few administrative signatures based on the lies of a woman who had contributed nothing to our community's well-being. Without my pension-facing legal fees that multiplied daily, with my professional reputation destroyed and my ability to earn income eliminated, I faced complete financial ruin. The transitional housing facility Margaret had helped me secure was no longer affordable, and I found myself facing homelessness once again. The eviction from my final refuge was orchestrated with deliberate cruelty designed to maximize my public humiliation. Susan had somehow arranged for local media coverage of my removal, ensuring that my personal disgrace was documented and broadcast throughout our community. The image of a former government public affairs officer carrying her few remaining possessions in garbage bags appeared in local newspapers under headlines like "Former Government Communicator Unable to Manage Own Crisis" and "Public Affairs Professional's Personal Affairs in Shambles." The photos were deliberately framed to make me appear frail, confused, and potentially dangerous, supporting Susan's narrative about my declining mental state. I returned to the crowded overnight shelter where I was surrounded by the sounds of other broken lives. The contrast between my current circumstances and the respect I had once commanded in professional communication circles was so stark that it felt surreal, like watching someone else's nightmare unfold in slow motion. David's response to my complete destitution was perhaps more painful than Susan's active cruelty. My brother maintained a chilling indifference to my homelessness that revealed the depth of his emotional disconnection from the woman who had raised and protected him throughout his life. When approached by a sympathetic journalist who asked about his sister's situation, David publicly stated that he had no legal or moral obligation to support someone who refuses to take responsibility for the consequences of their own manipulative behavior. My sister made choices that led to this situation. He said, his voice cold and emotionless during a brief television interview. She chose to use her professional skills to control and manipulate family relationships rather than accept appropriate boundaries. We can't sacrifice our family's well-being to enable her continued denial about her behavior. David's complete abandonment of sibling loyalty was devastating, but it also revealed how thoroughly Susan had succeeded in rewriting our family history. The brother whose freedom I had purchased with my life savings now spoke about me as if I were a stranger whose suffering was the natural consequence of my own choices. But perhaps the most twisted demonstration of their complete victory came when Susan used funds from her initial $50,000 lawsuit settlement to purchase what she called a Truth and Transparency Media Center for David's supposed advocacy work. The facility, complete with professional recording equipment and broadcasting capabilities, was built using money that had been extracted from my financial ruin. The grand opening was a highly publicized community event that Susan promoted as a symbol of moral courage and authentic communication. She spoke at the dedication ceremony about David's unwavering convictions and commitment to exposing manipulation wherever it exists, while standing in a building that had been purchased with the proceeds of my systematic destruction. Photographs of the gleaming facility, complete with a bronze plaque dedicating it to ethical family communication and truth-telling, were shared widely across Susan's social media platforms. David stood proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by community leaders and local media who praised his commitment to family accountability, never knowing they were celebrating a monument built on the complete betrayal of his sister. The physical and emotional toll of this relentless siege finally overwhelmed my body's ability to cope. One morning in the shelter, as I struggled to get dressed, with hands that shook from constant stress and malnutrition, a crushing pain seized my chest. The room spun around me, and I collapsed onto the concrete floor, my body finally surrendering to the immense pressure I had been carrying for months. The heart attack was severe and nearly fatal. I was rushed to the emergency room, unconscious, my life hanging by a thread, while Susan's social media followers continued to celebrate her latest posts about truth and transparency. For hours, I drifted between consciousness and darkness, isolated and abandoned by everyone except Margaret and the small network of professionals who had begun to see through Susan's elaborate deception. But even in my unconscious state, my mind was working through the devastating realization that had been building for months. As I lay barely clinging to life, I experienced a vivid dreamlike memory that felt more real than my present circumstances. I was back in my government office 15 years ago, managing a crisis communications case that had troubled me for weeks afterward. The situation involved a powerful business leader who had orchestrated a sophisticated character assassination campaign against a whistleblower who had exposed financial irregularities in his organization. The businessman's tactics had been systematic and ruthless, documenting concerning behaviors that were actually normal professional activities, reframing the whistleblower's ethical concerns as evidence of mental instability, and using media manipulation to transform victim into perpetrator in the public narrative. In my dream, the fragmented pieces of that old case suddenly coalesced into a complete chilling realization. Susan's methods, her systematic documentation of my supposed inappropriate behavior, her alliance with legal and media professionals, her reframing of family love as psychological manipulation were identical to the patterns I had professionally witnessed in that disturbing case from years past. She wasn't simply a resentful family member establishing boundaries with an intrusive relative. This was sophisticated psychological warfare being executed by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate public perception, legal systems, and family dynamics to achieve complete destruction while maintaining the appearance of victimhood. The recognition hit me like lightning, even in my unconscious state. I had spent my career protecting institutions and individuals from exactly this kind of systematic character assassination, and now I was the target of the most sophisticated manipulation campaign I had ever encountered. As I lay there barely alive, that realization ignited something deep within me, the same professional instincts that had protected public interest during countless crises. My body might be failing, but my understanding of what Susan was doing had become crystal clear. I had dedicated my life to ensuring truth prevailed over manipulation, and that public trust was protected from those who would exploit it for personal gain. Now, even if it killed me, I was going to use everything I had learned to expose the most dangerous family manipulator I had ever encountered, the one who was systematically destroying her husband's family while presenting herself as a victim of their supposed abuse. My recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it brought with it a clarity of purpose I hadn't possessed since this nightmare began. Margaret and her network of professionals had been quietly building a case that would expose Susan's systematic manipulation while I lay in that hospital bed, finally understanding the true scope of what we were fighting against. From my hospital room, surrounded by machines monitoring my fragile heart, I made a decision that would either restore my relationship with my family or complete my destruction. With the help of Maria, a compassionate nurse who had become invested in my story, after hearing about the case from Margaret, I recorded a raw emotional video message that laid out the truth about Susan's character and the lengths to which she had gone to destroy me. My voice was still weak from the heart attack, occasionally trembling with exhaustion, but my words carried the weight of professional authority earned through 3 decades of public service and a mother's desperate love. Michael, I began looking directly into the camera despite my physical frailty. I know Susan and David have convinced you that I'm a danger to our family, but I need you to understand something that they have never wanted you to know about the true nature of Susan's campaign against me. I played carefully selected excerpts from the voice-activated recordings that had captured Susan's calculated discussions about fabricating assault charges and her systematic plan to destroy my reputation. Her voice, clear and unmistakable, revealed the cold manipulation behind her claims of victimhood. "Listen to her tone," I said, pausing the recording. "That's not the voice of a victim seeking justice or protection. That's someone strategically planning to destroy a family member for personal satisfaction. This is your aunt, calculating how to eliminate me from our family, while making it appear that she's protecting everyone from my supposed violence and manipulation." I revealed carefully measured details about David's hidden financial troubles from decades past, explaining how I had quietly saved him from federal prison and financial ruin without ever seeking gratitude or recognition. I provided enough documentation to prove my claims without compromising ongoing legal strategies. I spent every penny of my retirement savings to ensure that David would have a future free from the consequences of his poor decisions. I said, my voice strengthening with conviction. I used my professional reputation and government connections to arrange legal assistance that saved him from decades in federal prison. I never asked for gratitude or recognition, but now Susan is using my love for my family as evidence that I'm manipulative and controlling. The video ended with a direct appeal to whatever remained of Michael's filial love and sense of justice. "Please," I said, tears streaming down my face, but my voice steady, "don't let her rewrite our entire family history. Don't let Susan's jealousy and manipulation destroy the bonds that have held our family together for decades. Maria helped me send the video to Michael's personal email account, bypassing Susan's social media channels and public personas to reach him directly. We waited anxiously for some response, hoping that finally, seeing irrefutable evidence of Susan's systematic fraud might break through the wall of lies she had built around my family. But our hope was catastrophically misplaced. Susan, who had somehow gained access to multiple family members' electronic communications through sophisticated monitoring software, intercepted my message before Michael could see it. What she did next demonstrated a level of technical sophistication and calculated cruelty that revealed the true extent of her psychological warfare capabilities. Susan took my raw emotional video and my carefully preserved audio evidence and systematically manipulated them using professional-grade digital editing software. She altered the pacing and inflection of my voice to make me sound paranoid and irrational. She spliced segments out of context, added unsettling background music, and cut sentences to completely change their meaning. The result was a grotesque distortion of my message that made me appear delusional, vindictive, and potentially dangerous. My desperate pleas for truth were reframed as grandiose, paranoid fantasies and manipulative attempts to blackmail family members with fabricated evidence. The audio proof of Susan's manipulation was either removed entirely or distorted beyond recognition. Susan then sold this heavily doctored video to a prominent national tabloid news program, presenting it as exclusive evidence of my complete mental breakdown and the dangerous delusions of an elderly woman who had lost all touch with reality. This heartbreaking video shows just how far my sister-in-law's mental illness has progressed. Susan told the news anchor with perfectly practiced concern. She's now creating elaborate conspiracy theories involving secret financial arrangements and hidden family manipulation. She's even claiming that she somehow saved David's life when he's never been in any kind of serious trouble. It's devastating to watch someone deteriorate this way. The story went viral within hours, spreading across multiple news networks and social media platforms. Commentators discussed my tragic decline and the impossible position Susan and David faced in dealing with a family member who had clearly lost her grip on reality. The manipulated video was played repeatedly, each viewing further cementing the narrative of my mental instability and Susan's patient victimhood. But Susan wasn't satisfied with simply discrediting my message. She convinced Michael to appear on national television for what she called a healing interview about the challenges of dealing with elderly family members who develop obsessive delusions about family relationships. I watched in complete horror as my son, tears streaming down his face, expressed profound sadness over my deteriorating condition and asked the public to respect our family's privacy during this incredibly difficult time. My mother was once a brilliant, capable woman. Michael said, his voice breaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion, but was actually carefully rehearsed performance. But something has changed dramatically in recent years. She's become completely obsessed with conspiracy theories about our family and convinced that everyone is plotting against her. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love lose their connection to reality this way. Michael brought 10-year-old Ethan onto the camera with him, my grandson looking appropriately sad and concerned as he delivered what were clearly coached lines about wishing Grandma Joyce could get the help she needs and hoping she can find peace instead of being angry all the time. The interview was a masterpiece of manipulation, portraying Susan as the long-suffering family member trying to protect everyone from an increasingly unstable relative, and Michael as the devoted son torn between love and necessary self-protection. Brenda Michaels' wife appeared alongside them, offering professional credibility to their narrative about my supposed mental decline. Sometimes, Brenda said with practiced sympathy, loving someone means protecting both them and yourself from the harm that untreated mental illness can cause. We're hoping Joyce will eventually accept the help she needs, but we can't sacrifice our children's emotional security while we wait for that to happen. The national interview succeeded in cementing my public image as a delusional, potentially dangerous woman whose own family had been forced to take legal action for their own safety. Any attempt I might make to defend myself would now be dismissed as further evidence of my deteriorating mental state and my inability to accept reality. But something was happening that Susan couldn't control or manipulate. Margaret's network of communication professionals had been quietly analyzing Susan's digital manipulation techniques and building a comprehensive case that exposed her sophisticated fraud operation. Dr. James Harrison, a renowned expert in digital forensics and media manipulation, had been meticulously analyzing the doctored video Susan had released. His preliminary findings revealed extensive evidence of professional-grade editing software being used to alter my voice patterns, facial expressions, and the context of my statements. What we're seeing here is not the confused rambling of someone with mental health issues, Dr. Harrison explained to Margaret during a confidential briefing. This level of digital manipulation requires expensive software, technical expertise, and significant premeditation. Someone paid professionals to create this distortion, which suggests a coordinated conspiracy rather than a family simply sharing concerning behavior from an elderly relative. More importantly, Dr. Harrison's investigation into Susan's online activities had uncovered evidence of her extensive use of anonymous social media accounts and her previous involvement in online manipulation campaigns against other targets. Your sister-in-law has a documented history of this kind of behavior, Dr. Harrison told me during my first meeting after being released from the hospital. She's not just manipulating your family relationships. She's running a sophisticated psychological warfare operation designed to destroy anyone who threatens her control or challenges her narrative. As I sat in Margaret's guest room that night, still weak from the heart attack, but mentally clearer than I had been in months, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: a cold professional determination to expose the truth regardless of the personal cost. Susan had made a critical error in her eagerness to destroy me completely. In creating such an elaborate and public campaign of character assassination, she had also created a documented trail of sophisticated manipulation that could be analyzed and exposed by experts who understood exactly what she was doing. The war for my dignity and my family's honor was about to enter its final phase, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I had weapons that could match Susan's sophisticated arsenal of lies and manipulation. My recovery from the heart attack had been slow but transformative, giving me not just physical strength, but an unwavering clarity about what needed to be done. Margaret's support network had grown into a formidable legal team, and through careful investigation, we had discovered a forgotten government bond I had purchased decades ago that provided the resources we needed for a proper counterattack. I hired 3 of the most respected professionals in their fields: Dr. James Harrison, the cyber forensics expert, who had already begun analyzing Susan's manipulation techniques; Robert Walsh, a renowned elder law attorney who specialized in family fraud cases; and Margaret herself, whose reputation in crisis communications lent tremendous credibility to our cause. Together, we launched a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit against Susan David and their accomplices for elder abuse fraud conspiracy and national defamation. The case immediately attracted global attention, not just because of the viral nature of Susan's previous campaigns, but because it represented a landmark challenge to sophisticated family manipulation tactics. The trial began on a crisp November morning with the courthouse packed to capacity and cameras broadcasting the proceedings worldwide. As I walked into that courtroom supported by Margaret and my legal team, I felt the weight of every elderly person who had been systematically betrayed by family members who exploited their love and trust. Susan and David entered with their remaining legal support, still projecting confidence despite the mounting evidence against them. They had no idea what was waiting for them. When Dr. Harrison stood to present our opening evidence, the courtroom fell into expectant silence. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of forensic experience. "We have audio and video evidence that will demonstrate the systematic psychological warfare conducted against Joyce Peterson by individuals who exploited her family love to commit serious crimes against her person, her reputation, and her fundamental right to live with dignity." The first piece of evidence was a revelation that stunned even me. The voice-activated recording system I had installed for security purposes had captured far more than I had initially realized. Hours of conversations revealed the true scope of Susan's calculated campaign and the chilling deliberation behind every lie. The audio began to play through speakers positioned around the courtroom. Susan's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the space as she spoke with calculating precision about fabricating assault charges against me. "The physical assault story is perfect," Susan's recorded voice said with satisfaction that made my blood freeze. "Joyce is old and frail-looking. People will believe she could snap under pressure. I just need to make sure I have some visible marks when I file the report." The conversation continued with David's voice, revealing his active participation in the conspiracy. "What about the family? Won't Michael and Brenda question the story?" "Michael will believe what I tell him to believe," Susan replied with cold confidence. "He's too weak to stand up to family pressure, and Brenda follows his lead. The key is to make Joyce look unstable and dangerous before anyone thinks to question my version of events. But the most damaging evidence came from recordings captured weeks later, showing Susan and David discussing their plan to systematically destroy my financial security and professional reputation. The beauty of this approach, Susan told David with chilling calculation, is that we're using her own professional background against her. Every time she tries to defend herself, it looks like manipulation. Every time she uses her communication skills, it appears calculated and dishonest. David's response revealed the depth of his betrayal and the systematic nature of their conspiracy. "What about her government pension and professional standing? Can we really get those revoked?" "Jenkins says it's possible if we frame it right," Susan said with obvious satisfaction. "Professional ethics violations, mental competency, issues misuse of public resources. Once her financial foundation crumbles, she'll be powerless to fight back." The recordings showed them explicitly planning to divert family funds, create fake social media accounts, and manipulate my grandchildren's emotions against me. Every cruel tactic, every manipulative strategy had been captured in high-definition audio clarity. When Jenkins was called to testify, confronted with undeniable evidence of his complicity in the conspiracy, he broke down completely on the witness stand. "She convinced me that Mrs. Peterson was genuinely dangerous and unstable. Jenkins sobbed his career and reputation crumbling in real time. Susan presented herself as a protective family member, dealing with an increasingly volatile elderly relative. I should have recognized the manipulation, but she was very convincing about the potential harm Joyce could cause. Jenkins's confession opened the floodgates for other co-conspirators to reveal their roles in Susan's elaborate scheme. The pattern was clear and devastating. Susan had systematically corrupted professional judgments, legal processes, and family relationships to create an appearance of legitimacy around her character assassination campaign. When Susan was finally called to testify in her own defense, the transformation was shocking and complete. The confident manipulator who had entered the courtroom was gone, replaced by someone who appeared to be having a total psychological breakdown. Confronted with hours of her own recorded words and the testimony of her co-conspirators, Susan's carefully constructed facade shattered entirely. I was just trying to protect my family. She stammered, her voice barely audible as tears streamed down her face. Joyce was so controlling, so successful. She made everyone feel inferior. I felt like she was judging us constantly, like we could never measure up to her standards. But as more recordings played revealing the calculated nature of her campaign and the deliberate cruelty of her tactics, Susan's composure completely disintegrated. She began sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking, as the full magnitude of her psychological warfare was exposed for the world to see. I never meant for it to go this far, she wailed, her voice breaking with what appeared to be genuine horror at her own actions. I just wanted her to know what it felt like to be powerless, to have people doubt everything about you. The sight of her complete collapse was both vindicating and heartbreaking. This was the woman who had systematically destroyed my relationship with my brother, who had corrupted my grandchildren's understanding of family love, reduced to a broken shell by the exposure of her own cruelty. David's breakdown was even more devastating to witness. Hearing the recordings of his own voice, participating in the conspiracy against me, seeing the evidence of his calculated betrayal of the sister who had saved his life, he crumbled completely under the weight of his actions. "Oh God," he whispered, his face buried in his hands as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. "What have I done? What have we done to you, Joyce? You saved my life, my future, my freedom, and I repaid you by helping her destroy you." His recognition of the magnitude of his betrayal was profound and genuine, but it came too late to undo the damage that had been done to our relationship and our family. The brother I had protected and loved had actively participated in my destruction, and that knowledge would forever change how I understood family loyalty and trust. As the day's testimony concluded and the court recessed, I sat surrounded by my legal team, feeling something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years, the profound relief that comes from having the truth finally heard and believed. The evidence was overwhelming. Susan's guilt was undeniable, and my vindication was complete. But even in that moment of triumph, I couldn't forget the cost of this victory. My family was shattered. My relationship with David was irreparably damaged, and my grandchildren would grow up knowing that their mother had systematically tried to destroy their grandmother's reputation and dignity. The truth had finally prevailed, but the price of that truth would echo through our family for generations to come. The verdict came after 6 days of deliberation delivered by Judge Margaret Foster, with the gravity and moral authority that such a comprehensive case of family betrayal demanded. The courtroom was packed with spectators, media representatives, and advocates for elder rights who had been following the trial as a landmark case in family law and elder abuse prevention. The evidence presented in this case, Judge Foster declared her voice ringing with moral indignation, reveals a pattern of elder abuse and family manipulation so systematic, so calculated, and so cruel that it represents one of the most disturbing examples of family betrayal this court has ever encountered. The defendants orchestrated a sophisticated campaign designed not only to destroy the plaintiff's reputation and financial security, but to weaponize her own family members against her while presenting themselves as victims of her supposed manipulation. Susan was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud conspiracy, and defamation. Her sentence was enhanced due to the sophisticated nature of her psychological manipulation and the extensive use of legal and social media systems to harm her victim. David received 6 years for his active complicity in the campaign, his sentence reflecting both his participation and his ultimate cooperation with the investigation. The financial restitution was comprehensive and decisive. Susan and David were ordered to pay for all my medical expenses, from the stress-induced heart attack, my legal fees, the costs of my homelessness, and professional destruction, and punitive damages totaling over $2 million. The court also ordered the immediate dissolution of the Truth and Transparency Center that had been built with fraudulent funds, with those resources redirected to organizations supporting elder abuse victims. But beyond the financial restoration, the court issued something even more precious to me: complete vindication of my character and professional integrity. Judge Foster's written opinion was a scathing condemnation of Susan's actions and a comprehensive restoration of my reputation. Joyce Peterson, the judge wrote, represents the finest qualities of public service and family devotion. She devoted her career to protecting public interests through ethical communication practices, and she made extraordinary personal sacrifices to ensure her family members' welfare and success. The abuse she suffered represents not just a crime against an individual, but an attack on the fundamental values of honesty, loyalty, and respect that hold families and communities together. The legal vindication felt like a spiritual cleansing. After 2 years of being portrayed as a mentally unstable, manipulative woman whose love was actually psychological abuse, the legal system had formally recognized not only my innocence, but my exemplary character and the extraordinary sacrifices I had made for my family. Jenkins lost his law license and faced criminal charges for his participation in Susan's fraud. His involvement in manipulating the legal system to commit elder abuse resulted in a 5-year sentence and permanent disbarment from legal practice. From prison, Susan sent me a letter that revealed the true depths of her psychological and moral collapse. Her handwriting was erratic, her thoughts scattered and desperate. Joyce, she wrote, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I'm begging for your forgiveness. I was so jealous of everything about your life, your success, your education, your relationship with your children, your standing in the community. I convinced myself that you thought you were better than us, that you looked down on David and me. The letter continued for several pages, detailing her growing understanding of the magnitude of what she had destroyed and her complete isolation from any source of love or support. I destroyed the woman who had only ever been kind to me because I was too insecure to accept that some people are just naturally more capable and generous than others. I turned your own brother against you and poisoned your grandchildren's minds because I couldn't stand watching your success while we struggled. Reading her letter, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing justice served, but also genuine sadness for the broken woman Susan had revealed herself to be. I had never wanted to destroy her. I had simply wanted to be treated with basic respect and honesty within my own family. David's journey toward redemption was more hopeful but equally complex. From his rehabilitation facility, He sent me a series of letters that showed genuine remorse and growing self-awareness about his role in the family's destruction. Joyce, he wrote in his first letter, I spend every day trying to understand how I could have chosen Susan's manipulation over your love, how I could have participated in destroying the sister who literally saved my life and freedom when I was young and stupid. I was a coward who chose the easy path of going along with Susan rather than standing up for what I knew was right. He detailed his therapy sessions where he was working to understand the psychological techniques Susan had used to turn him against me and manipulate his understanding of family loyalty. The therapist says I was a victim of psychological manipulation too, but that doesn't excuse my choices. I was an adult who should have protected you instead of participating in your destruction. David's letters became a regular part of my healing process, each one showing progress in his understanding of family dynamics and his commitment to eventual reconciliation. While full restoration of our relationship remained distant, I could see genuine change in his thinking and genuine remorse for the pain he had caused. Michael's response to the trial's outcome was immediate and profound. My son, who had been confused and distant during the worst of Susan's campaign, sought me out privately to make what he called the most important apology of my life. Mom, he said, tears streaming down his face as we sat in my temporary apartment. I am so ashamed of how I doubted you even for a moment. I knew your character. I knew your integrity. But I let Susan's lies create doubt in my mind about the woman who raised me and loves me unconditionally. Michael's commitment to making amends went far beyond words. He took immediate action to support my recovery and restoration, using his professional connections to help rebuild my reputation and his personal resources to ensure my comfort during the legal proceedings. He became my steadfast advocate and source of emotional support, demonstrating through his actions the family loyalty that Susan had tried so hard to destroy. Brenda, Michael's wife, proved to be a pillar of strength for both of us during this difficult period. She had remained skeptical of Susan's accusations from the beginning, and her unwavering support of my character had helped keep Michael grounded during the worst of the crisis. I never believed Susan's stories about you, Brenda told me during one of our conversations. Anyone who spent 5 minutes with you could see that you're incapable of the manipulation she described. Your love for your family is genuine and selfless, and I'm grateful that Michael and I get to be part of rebuilding what she tried to destroy. Perhaps the most delicate aspect of our family's healing involved my grandchildren, Ethan and Chloe. Now 14 and 12, they had been deeply traumatized by their parents' downfall and the revelation of how they had been manipulated into participating in my humiliation. Grandma Joyce, Ethan said during one of our first conversations after the trial, I'm so sorry for the things we said about you. Mom made it seem like we were protecting our family, but we were really hurting you. I didn't understand that adults could lie about such important things. Chloe struggled more with the complex emotions of guilt, confusion, and anger at her parents' deception. I feel stupid for believing Mom's stories about you, she said quietly. But she's my mom, and I thought moms were supposed to tell the truth about important things. Through ongoing family therapy and patient conversation, both children began to understand how they had been used as weapons in an adult conflict that they never should have been exposed to. Their healing would take time, but I could see the foundation of authentic, loving relationships being rebuilt based on truth rather than manipulation. The victory was complete, but it was also profoundly bittersweet. My integrity had been restored, my financial security was rebuilt, and justice had been served. But the cost had been enormous. Years of family harmony had been shattered. My relationship with David would never be the same, and my grandchildren would carry the trauma of their parents' manipulation for years to come. As I sat in my restored home that first evening after the trial concluded, surrounded by legal documents that vindicated my character and family photographs that had been returned to me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: profound peace mixed with deep sadness for all that had been lost in the pursuit of truth. The war was over and justice had prevailed, but the work of healing and rebuilding our family was just beginning. 3 years after the trial that restored my reputation and revealed the truth about Susan's systematic manipulation, I find myself living a life I never could have imagined during those dark months of isolation and legal battles. My cherished ancestral log cabin, completely renovated with the restitution money and filled once again with the sounds of genuine family connection, has become not just my sanctuary, but a symbol of resilience and authentic living. The house radiates with a different kind of energy, now one that comes from relationships that have been tested by the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger through the commitment to healing and truth. Michael and Brenda visit every Sunday, and our bond has grown deeper than it was even before Susan's campaign began. The shared experience of fighting for truth has created an unbreakable connection between us. "Mom," Michael said to me recently as we worked together in the garden I had created behind the cabin, "I think our relationship is stronger now than it ever was before. Having to fight for the truth about who you really are made me appreciate everything you've done for our family in ways I never understood before." His words capture something profound about our family dynamic now. The love between us isn't just natural affection. It has been tested and proven through the worst circumstances, making it unbreakable in ways that ordinary family relationships might never experience. Brenda has become not just my daughter-in-law, but a trusted confidant and dear friend. She often speaks about feeling grateful that the truth was revealed, even though it meant watching our family go through such trauma. "You taught us that love doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations or pretending problems don't exist," Brenda told me during one of our evening walks. "You showed us that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is fight for truth, even when it's painful and the outcome is uncertain." David's journey toward redemption continues from his rehabilitation facility, where he's working not just on understanding his own manipulation, but on developing skills for healthy family relationships. His letters have evolved from expressions of guilt to thoughtful reflections on family dynamics, personal integrity, and his hopes for eventual reconciliation. "I want to be the brother you deserve to have," he wrote in his most recent letter, "and the father Ethan and Chloe need me to be. I know that will take years of work and proof through actions, not just words. But I finally understand what family loyalty really means, and I want to rebuild something authentic with all of you when I've earned the right to be trusted again." While our relationship remains cautious and long distance, I can see genuine change in his thinking and genuine commitment to becoming someone worthy of his children's respect and love. The work is hard and the timeline uncertain, but there's hope where once there was only betrayal and manipulation. Susan remains in prison, serving her sentence in relative isolation. Her few letters to me have shown increasing mental instability and a desperate need for forgiveness that goes far beyond anything I could provide. The woman who orchestrated such sophisticated psychological warfare has been reduced to someone who can barely maintain coherent thought destroyed by the magnitude of her own cruelty and the complete exposure of her character. I respond to her letters with compassion, but without false hope. Some actions create consequences that cannot be undone, relationships that cannot be restored. Susan will have to find her redemption elsewhere if she can find it at all. Ethan and Chloe have become frequent visitors to my cabin, seeking me out, not just for family activities, but for guidance through their own healing process. Now 16 and 14, they often talk about feeling grateful that the truth was revealed, even though it meant losing the parents they thought they knew. You teach us that honesty isn't always easy, but it's always worth it, Chloe told me during one of our conversations about family values. Even when the truth hurts, it's better than living with lies that make everyone feel confused and scared. Their understanding of complex family dynamics, learned through trauma but guided by therapy and honest conversation, has given them wisdom beyond their years about relationships, manipulation, and the importance of standing up for truth, even when it's difficult. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation in my life has been my emergence as a national advocate for elder abuse prevention and family integrity. My story has become a powerful tool for educating families, legal professionals, and social workers about the sophisticated tactics that can be used to isolate and destroy elderly family members. I speak at conferences across the country, sharing my experience with audiences who are dealing with similar situations or working to prevent them. My memoir, Truth Over Lies: A Family's Fight Against Manipulation, has become a bestseller and resource guide for other abuse survivors and their advocates. Margaret and I founded the Joyce Peterson Foundation for Family Truth, which provides legal assistance and emotional support for elderly people who have been systematically betrayed by family members. We work with a network of attorneys, therapists, and advocates who specialize in these complex cases, offering hope to people who thought they had no recourse against sophisticated family manipulation. What happened to you represents a new frontier in elder abuse, I tell audiences during my speaking engagements. It's not just financial exploitation or physical neglect. It's the systematic destruction of family bonds through psychological manipulation and legal intimidation, often carried out by the very people who should be providing love and support. But there is always hope, and there are always people willing to fight for justice if you have the courage to seek help. The work is demanding, but deeply fulfilling. Every letter I receive from someone who found the courage to fight against family manipulation, every successful case, our foundation helps support every family that reunites after being torn apart by lies and exploitation, reminds me that my suffering was not meaningless. My days are full and purposeful in ways I never expected after such trauma. Mornings often find me tending to my garden or writing responses to correspondence from abuse survivors. Afternoons might be spent consulting with attorneys on complex elder abuse cases or preparing presentations for professional conferences. Evenings belong to family time and reflection. Michael, Brenda, Ethan, Chloe, and I gather regularly for dinners that are filled with laughter, honest conversation, and the deep contentment that comes from relationships built on truth rather than convenience or fear. As I look back on the journey from my lowest point in that homeless shelter to this life of purpose and authentic connection, I am struck by the resilience of the human spirit and the power of truth to eventually prevail. The trauma I experienced will always be part of my story, but it no longer defines me. Instead, it has become the foundation for a deeper understanding of love, justice, and the importance of fighting for what is right, even when the cost seems unbearable. My family is growing up understanding that relationships can survive even the worst betrayals when people commit to honesty and healing. They're learning that love doesn't mean accepting abuse, that respect must be earned through actions, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's harmful behavior. These lessons learned through pain, but resulting in wisdom, will serve them well as they build their own families and face their own challenges. The legacy I'm leaving them isn't just the memory of a grandmother who fought for truth, but the knowledge that integrity and courage are worth defending, no matter the cost. 5 years have passed since that devastating day when Susan first fabricated assault charges against me. And as I sit on my cabin porch this evening, watching Michael and Brenda help Ethan and Chloe prepare for their upcoming college applications while sharing stories about integrity and perseverance, I am overwhelmed by the profound transformation that suffering can create when it's met with unwavering commitment to truth and justice. My ancestral log cabin resonates with the sounds of genuine family connection rebuilt on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation or fear. The laughter that fills these rooms now carries a deeper meaning because it's been earned through struggle, forgiveness, and the hard work of authentic relationship building. Each gathering feels precious because we all understand how easily family bonds can be severed by those who would exploit love for their own destructive purposes. The work I do now, helping other elderly family members who face systematic betrayal and psychological abuse, has given my later years a purpose I never anticipated. Through our foundation, we have assisted over 1,500 families in recognizing and combating sophisticated manipulation tactics, restored dozens of family relationships, and changed legislation in 8 states to better protect elderly people from family-based fraud and emotional abuse. My story has become a beacon of hope for those who thought justice was impossible proof that even the most calculated and comprehensive betrayal can be overcome through courage, persistence, and the support of people who believe in the fundamental importance of truth and family integrity. But more than professional vindication, I have discovered the profound peace that comes from living authentically surrounded by people who love me for who I truly am, rather than what I can provide them. The lesson I carry from this journey reaches deeper than simple strategies for protecting oneself from family manipulation. I learned that our greatest strength lies not in avoiding conflict or maintaining false peace, but in having the courage to confront deception and fight for authenticity when those we love are threatened by lies and exploitation. Self-worth is indeed an unshakable foundation that no one can take from us without our permission, and authentic family relationships are built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than control, envy, or psychological manipulation. I carry no bitterness toward Susan or the pain she caused. Bitterness would only poison the peace I have fought so hard to achieve and the relationships I have worked so carefully to rebuild. Instead, I have transformed my deepest trauma into lasting purpose, becoming an advocate for justice and dignity for those who cannot fight for themselves. To anyone listening who may be facing their own family betrayal, who feels isolated and manipulated by those who should cherish them, I want you to know this: your integrity matters, your voice has value, and there are people who will stand with you when you find the courage to seek truth and justice. The path may be long and the cost may be high, but it leads to something infinitely precious, a life lived with authenticity, genuine relationships built on honesty, and the profound peace that comes from knowing you never compromised your values even in your darkest hour. That kind of peace earned through struggle and sacrifice becomes a legacy worth leaving for those who come after us.